In Reddit, we trust. Hello, wonderful people of the internet. My name is Matthew. Today, I'm going to be doing a pretty special video for Matthew Talks About American Literature and More, and I hope you all enjoy. And it's the top 10 best Reddit books, or Reddit's 10 favorite books. As you guys can probably guess, I'm a guy who loves reading, but also a guy who probably spends too much time online. As a joke, I like to say that most of my screen time is edutainment on YouTube, surfing Wikipedia, and reading long, lengthy Reddit posts. But when I'm online, I always make it a point to try to find good book recommendations. What are the books that people who've read them, like them, and that would align to my taste? And as you know, I'm a big fan of classic literature, but more broadly, any great book in general. So, as someone who likes the platform, while acknowledging it that, like any social media platform, has its flaws, but speaking to my own experiences, has had a good time, has found a lot of value. What are the favorite books that I would recommend and that are recommended to almost everyone on the platform? The 10 books that I'm going to be discussing here are what I like to call normie masterpieces. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. I mean that these are books that you could give to almost anyone, whether that be a classics lover, or a guy who hasn't read a book since high school, your grandma, a kid if they had the right reading level. A book that you can give to almost anyone, and it will likely be a smash hit. I also think all of them are good choices for book clubs, and all of them deserve the reputation that they have as great books by both average readers and the literary community. I'm going to be giving you these 10 books, a short synopsis, why you should read them, and my personal thoughts, and who I would recommend this book to. And be warned that not every book is going to work for every reader. While I do think that if you read all these 10 books, in all likelihood, you will like, if not love, most of them. I guarantee there's going to be 2 or 3 that you're probably not going to like at all. But even in that instance, I think you're not going to regret that you've read them. You will get something out of them. So, with all that said, let's dive in. Now, the first book that I'm going to be talking about is a book that I don't have a copy of, but it's called The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. It currently has a 4.33 on Goodreads, and this is a book that's been all the rage on YouTube. People like Patrick Book Reviews and Bibliophile Reads have recently read it and loved it. And this is a book that's very special to me because it was actually got me back into reading fiction 2 or 3 years ago. I was in college. I watched a YouTube video on extra history. They were doing a literature course. I thought, yeah, this sounds like an interesting read. I read it. And it's to this day one of those formative books for me. Now, to give you the short synopsis, this book follows a man called Edmond Dantes who was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. And his 4 conspirators all knew he was innocent and conspired to put him into a prison. In the prison, he meets a man named Albifari who trains him to be almost this superhero character, finds great wealth, and returns to enact his revenge on all those people who wronged him. This is a book that is, first and foremost, one of the most fun adventure books you will ever read. And while now, as someone who's read a lot more stuff, probably wouldn't consider it his favorite book of all time, it's still in my personal canon as one of my favorites. This is a book that you should read for people who love plot, who love adventures, want great characters. It's basically the ultimate soap opera in book form. This is also a great page turner. Like if you're in a book club, this is one of those books that people are going to be messaging each other on how great this one moment is. So much drama, so much catharsis. It's an epic tale. The few caveats I would point out is that 1, this book is really long. It's like 1,400 pages. So if long books deter you, that's definitely a thing to mention. 2, while I do like the writing, the prose in this book is good, but it's not spectacular. It's not something you read for its prose. It can get convoluted, especially around 40% in. Things start to get really messy, and especially if you're not familiar with the story, and it could get confusing. And while, for the most part, this book is impeccably paced, there is one section in the middle that takes place in Italy that is, at least for some people, poorly paced. But all in all, this is still one of my favorite books. I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5, one of the most entertaining books ever. The only issues I have are, 1, that pacing section in the middle, and this is one of those books where the ending doesn't fully stick the landing for me. But all in all, fantastic book. Would recommend it to anyone, especially someone who wants to get back into reading. The second book that I'm going to be mentioning is a book that's also been going all the rage on BookTube, and that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Now, this book probably is the most beloved book on BookTube and in the book community at the moment. It currently has, I believe, a 4.59 on Goodreads, which is insanely high. Everyone's been reading it lately. It won the 1985 Pulitzer Prize. It's considered the greatest Western out there. This is probably my favorite book ever, or definitely in my top 5, and I would recommend it to everyone. Short synopsis. This is a book that follows 2 retired Texas Rangers as they lead a group of around 20 people, I forget the number, on a long, grueling journey from the El Paso River in Texas all the way to Montana on a grueling cattle drive where they encounter friendship, love, and loss along the way. And it's one of the most epic tales I've ever read. But the people that I would recommend this book to are people who love characters. This book unquestionably has the greatest character work that I have ever read in any novel in my life. It's going to take a lot for another novel to do better character work than this. Second, this is a book that if people love big, sprawling, dramatic, epic stories. The last third of this book made me cry at various moments that I don't think any book will ever do again. This is also a book that has a ton of action, a ton of adventure, and if you're one of those readers that seeks that out, I would highly recommend it. But a couple caveats that might deter you. One, I don't think this book is particularly plot heavy, so if you're someone who likes a lot of twists and turns in their story, you're not going to find that in here. Lonesome Dove is not really a book that you read for themes. Not saying that it has bad themes. This is actually one of the most thematically expansive books that I've ever read. But I'm saying that, like, you're not going to get long, agonizing passages over the meaning of life or anything like that. This is a book that it's about the story and about the characters, and you have to glean that through that. But this is one of my favorite books. I would recommend it to anyone. I hope you'll read it, and I hope you'll love it. The third book that I'm going to be mentioning is another great book, and it introduced me to probably my favorite author of all time, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Wow. This book is widely considered one of the greatest American novels of all time. It has a 4.44 on Goodreads. It's by what I consider the greatest American author. This is considered his magnum opus saga. The premise of this book is that it's basically a family saga following 2 families, the Trasks, which almost relive the Cain and Abel story, and the Hamiltons, which are a surrogate for John Steinbeck's own family himself. And this book is the ultimate meditation on the choice between good and evil. This is probably the single most readable book that I've ever read. And what I mean by readable is that every sentence almost leads to the next. You want to keep reading it. Not in the sense that it's thrilling or that it's exciting, even though it is. This is one of the most profound, in-depth books I've ever read. But I mean, this book is around 602 pages. I read this thing in 4 days. This thing is incredible. Characters, fire. Prose, incredible. And it's one of those books that if you read for themes, if you read for characters, if you read for writing, if you read just to have a quick read, this is the book for you. Now, to be fair, I'll give you a few caveats. One, Steinbeck is known for being very heavily symbolic. And what I mean by that is that he shows you the symbolism. He tells you this is a representation for this. Now, I'm someone who likes that, but a lot of people don't. Second of all, this book has incredible characters, but be warned that a lot of them are symbol people. Not that they're not people, but they almost represent symbolism. There's a character in here that basically represents evil. That is a legitimate criticism. You'll understand when you read this. And the only minor thing is that while I do like John Steinbeck's characters, some of the characters in the Hamilton family aren't entirely relevant to the plot. They almost act like little parables within the story, and that's fine. I actually, as someone who really likes that, but I understand why some people don't. But all in all, this is definitely a 5 out of 5 book for me, and one of my favorite books of all time, and I would recommend it to everyone. Almost everyone that I respect who has read this has gotten at least something out of it, so I definitely recommend it. The fourth book that I'm going to be recommending is Stoner by John Williams. This is actually a very special book for me because it introduced me to the publisher NYRB, which publishes a lot of underrated and out-of-print books. And this is probably one of the simplest stories that I've ever read, and at the same time, maybe the most moving. Getting emotional just thinking about it. It basically follows this unassuming man called William Stoner, who's a professor at a university, and we basically learn from the first page that he lived his whole life there, had a very unassuming life, and by most metrics in life, a failure. But the way that this story is told, it makes all of Stoner's struggles so relatable, so meaningful, that you almost feel within you that the pain that he experiences as if it was your own. Stoner is one of the most stoic, greatest, most existential heroes in American literature. I put him up there as one of my favorite characters in American literature and in literature broadly. This is one of those books that is focused on one character and one character study, and that is it. But it tells it so well. That's why I think you should read it and why I recommend it. Now, again, a couple caveats. One, almost everyone who doesn't like this book says the same thing, that Stoner himself is an incredibly passive character. He doesn't take a lot of action. So if that's something that deters you, be warned. Now, it didn't deter me, but I have known for people even who love this book who've wanted to go into the book and shake Stoner to do something. And the last thing, when I said that this book focuses on one character, there are a couple characters in this book that do play a role in Stoner's lives that are very selfish, very toxic, and their motivations are not 100% clear. They are implied, in my opinion, but it is something that I have seen people point to and say, oh, that's a flaw in the book. And I would understand that. But overall, this is still one of my favorite books, one of the books that I cherish more than anything. It currently has a 4.35 on Goodreads, which is incredibly high, and definitely a book that I would hand out to everyone. So, Stoner by John Williams. The fifth book is a book that I just recently read, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book has a 4.15 on Goodreads, and what's interesting about this book is that this is one of those books that almost everyone I've read, but the people that I hear have read it come from all over, whether they're YA readers, whether they're thriller readers, whether they're classic readers. This is one of those books that has almost founded the dark academia subgenre, and it has been incredibly influential over the last 35 years, I want to say, and has kind of launched Donna Tartt's career as a kind of a literary superstar. To give you the short synopsis, this follows a group of elitist Greek classicists in this liberal arts college in New England, and they conspired to murder one of their classmates. It reads as a thriller and a critique on elitism. It acts as a way to deconstruct certain Greek archetypes, culminating as a kind of critique on the emptiness of beauty. Now, just to give you my short thoughts, I really like this book. It didn't quite reach my personal canon, but it is one of those books that I think will endure as a classic for years to come. And this, I think, is a great book to get almost anyone back into reading. I would recommend this book for people who especially like thrillers, the dark academia, or noir subgenre, people who like Greek or classical Greek, Latin literature. I think we'll get a lot out of this book. And I think this is also a book that is great to give for teenagers as like a new experience with literature, as like a coming of age. The couple caveats that I would give to this book is that this book's characters, not that they're bad, but this book isn't really focused on character development. A lot of these characters are archetypes, well written in a way that makes them interesting, but not in a way where like you're not going to get a huge character arc in this book. And also, I do think the second half of this book is not quite as thrilling as the first half. But overall, I would highly recommend this book. This is one of those books that seems to have entered its way into the pop culture, but at the same time has maintained a status as a quality literary book. So, highly recommend this one. The sixth book that I'm going to be recommending is a book that I just recently read, and it blew me away. And that is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This book has a 4.24 on Goodreads, and it is one of the most moving books that I've ever read. It follows a man named Charlie Gordon, who is mentally retarded, but signs up for this procedure that was performed on a rat that will increase his intelligence. The procedure was highly successful on the mouse, and it does, and it basically makes him the smartest person in the world. But then the rat regresses, And the story basically follows his journey as his knowledge expands and how he emotionally matures throughout it. This book is one of the masterclasses in speculative fiction. The journey that Charlie goes through here is absolutely heartbreaking, but in a way that's almost triumphant and tragic at the same time. It poses insightful questions on to how we should treat people that are mentally different, but also how we can treat, but also gives empathy to everyone in this book. There's no villain here. Everyone is treated with dignity and respect, and it's just an incredible story. I would recommend this to anyone. I would probably give to teenagers. This book I would probably give to people who want to get into sci-fi. It is sci-fi, but it's also not really. It's just so universal that almost anyone loves it. The only caveat is, once again, if you're not into speculative fiction, which I'm not, and I still love this, but if you're one of those people that flat out doesn't want to read that, I probably wouldn't recommend it. And the writing here, it's not bad writing. It's not even just good writing. It's great. But it's not a book that you read for its writing. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. And you read it for the characters, the concept, and the journey. So, Fly from Algernon. Highly recommend. The 7th book on this list is a book that I did consider not putting on this list, but even though I do love it, and that is Dune by Frank Herbert. This is considered the greatest sci-fi book of all time, and for good reason. It follows Paul Atreides, whose family becomes the ruler of Arrakis, a desert sand planet that produces a material called the spice that is necessary for this intergalactic civilization, and it follows his family through a dramatic sci-fi plot in this wholly original world that is unlike anything in sci-fi. This I think, is a high drama in a science fiction setting. It's science fiction for people who don't read science fiction. The plot is great, and the themes in this book are second to none. Fear is a mind killer. Great stuff. I would recommend this to anyone who wants to get into sci-fi, anyone who likes great world building, great speculation. The only caveat I would say is that while this book is probably the sci-fi book that most people who don't like sci-fi read, it is still a sci-fi book. So if you're adamantly you don't want to read any sci-fi, I wouldn't recommend this book. And the characters, in this book, I wouldn't say are bad, but they're not the greatest characters ever. I would say they're basically perfect for this story. So, Dune, highly recommend. The 8th book on this list is a book that, I'll be honest, I don't really love, but has been widely acclaimed enough, both in time and on Reddit, that I felt that I should put it on this list. And that is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book has a 4.29 on Goodreads, and it follows the story of a student named Raskolnikov, who in this story commits a murder for money. And it basically follows the story on whether it's... And it's essentially a psychological drama that follows his unraveling, his reasoning for committing the murder, and blurs the line between what are the actions that are truly good and truly evil, and whether punishment actually solves crime, and the possibilities of redemption. I think this is a great book if someone is looking for themes, someone who's looking for very introspective character studies, and someone who wants to get into Russian literature. A couple caveats, and this caveat is something that reflected on my reading experience. I don't think this book has the greatest prose. I think this book's prose is not terrible, but especially among classics, fairly mediocre. And lastly, these characters are very agonizing. I do think they are somewhat inexplicable. There are some characters in here that I wasn't able to get behind, and whose actions seem opaque and histrionic. But all in all, I do think this book is worth a read, even if you don't like it. It has enough historical significance and enough value as a piece of work in itself that I would recommend it. So, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, I need to give you guys a couple caveats. These last 2 books I haven't read, but I have read enough about these works, and in one of these cases, I am familiar with something related, so I think I would still feel comfortable recommending these to people, but just a fair warning. The 9th book on this list is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Now, I've read other books by the Bronte sisters and really enjoyed them, but this is considered probably the most beloved novel of the Bronte sisters, maybe outside of Wuthering Heights, but I think this one is more widely accessible. It basically follows Jane Eyre as she becomes a governess at this estate called Thornfield Hall, and it's almost a gothic romantic thriller as she falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester, but comes to grow and love herself more and focuses on what Jane loves and wants out of life and how she tries to get it. This book has a 4.16 on Goodreads. It's one of the most beloved classics of all time. Very likable central main character. And I would recommend this book for anyone who wants very clean prose, great characters, a great romance, and great gothic vibes. Now, I haven't read this, so the only caveat I've known from people who don't like this book is that the character Mr. Rochester is pretty toxic. And that kind of toxic love story doesn't appeal to everyone. I don't know, I can't comment too much on this book, but in the end, this book's reputation is beyond anything that I can say here, and I think everyone should read it at one point in their life. So, all in all, I would still recommend that this one's worth a read. The 10th book on this list may be a little bit controversial, but I feel that this author is important to mention at some point, and that is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This book is currently standing at, I think, a 4.35 on Goodreads, so it's pretty well beloved. And I know not everyone is a fan of Stephen King, but I wanted to include Stephen King on this list because I think he's probably the most well-known pop culture author in the world at this moment. His books, even if you don't like his books, have had a tremendous impact on cinema and pop culture. I think this book, 11/22/63, is one of those books that even people who like classics tend to really enjoy. It's also probably his most popular book on Reddit. To give you the short synopsis, this book follows two characters as they travel back in time to the 60s, and their goal is to try to stop the JFK assassination. This main character, Jack, is living this really down-and-out life in the present, and his mission drives him to find new meaning in his life. Now, like I said, I haven't read this book, so I don't want to comment too much on it. But Stephen King's reputation is pretty much solidified at this point. He's a very simple author to read. He tends to have pretty good plots, pretty great character works, and tends to have very imaginative abilities, a lot of creative powers. So if you're into Stephen King, and if you're into modern page turners or anything like that, I could pretty confidently recommend this book to you. The couple caveats I would point out is that King is also infamous for not having the greatest prose of all time. I've read the first couple chapters. The prose seems very passable. Nothing that I would give a gold star to, but nothing that I would say is bad or isn't worthy of a great book. And lastly, his characters don't necessarily come off as people all the time. But at least from what I've read like the first 40 pages of this book, the characters seem like good characters. They may not be people, but they're good characters that are more than worthy to carry a long, expansive, quality novel. So, that'll do it. Those are Reddit's 10 favorite books that I think you should read. Hope you found this video useful. Hope you picked me up. And if you've read any of these books, please let me know. Let me know your thoughts on them. And if there are other books that you've seen on Reddit pop up a lot, leave them down in the comments. I'll put them on my list. I'll let you know what I thought of them if I read them. So, hope you found this video useful. Hope this video finds you well, and happy reading.